"Don't touch that envelope," my daughter's husband said, pressing his hand flat against the kitchen counter. "Please, just get in the car. I'll explain everything." I looked at him. 37 years old, a man I had known for 11 years, a man who had stood in my backyard on a Sunday afternoon and asked me, properly, if he could marry my daughter. A man I trusted. And he was looking at me the way you look at someone when you need them to believe you without any reason to. "Get in the car," he said again. "We have to go. Right now." I didn't ask where. I didn't ask why. Something in his voice made me stop asking questions. I picked up my purse and I followed him out the door. That was the morning everything I thought I knew about my daughter's life turned out to be wrong. I should tell you something about myself first, because it matters. My name is Margaret. I am 64 years old. I live in the same house in Oakville, Ontario, where my husband Gerald and I raised our 2 children. Gerald passed 4 years ago, April. Lung cancer. 18 months from diagnosis to the end. And I was with him every single day of it. After he was gone, I did what you do. I kept going. I kept the house. I visited my son in Vancouver when I could. And I stayed close to my daughter, who lives 40 minutes away in Burlington, which felt, in those first years without Gerald, like the one thing holding me steady. My daughter is the kind of person who calls you on a Tuesday for no reason. She drops off soup when she knows you haven't been sleeping well. She remembers that you take your tea with 1 sugar, not 2, and she never gets it wrong. I say all of this because what I'm about to tell you is not a story about a bad person. My daughter is not a bad person. That's what made it so hard to understand. Her husband, I'll call him by his name, Martin. I will say this about Martin. He is a quiet man. Not cold. Just quiet. He thinks before he speaks, which is rarer than people admit. He works in project management for a construction firm out of Hamilton. He coaches minor hockey on Saturday mornings. He's the kind of man who shows up. Gerald liked him immediately, which I always took as the highest possible endorsement because Gerald was not easily impressed. They married 9 years ago. The wedding was at a winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake in October, all gold and amber light, and I remember thinking that afternoon that some things in life actually go the way you hoped they would. They bought a house in Burlington 3 years later. Then 2 years after that, they had my granddaughter, Abby. She is 6 now. She has Gerald's eyes. I thought I knew everything about their life. I did not know anything. It started on a Wednesday in March, not dramatically. Nothing about the beginning of it was dramatic at all. I had driven up to Burlington to drop off a slow cooker I promised my daughter weeks earlier. She'd mentioned wanting to make more soups, and I had 2, which is 1 too many for a woman living alone. I texted her when I turned onto her street. She didn't reply, which wasn't unusual. She was probably at work. She teaches elementary school, grade 2, and her days are not exactly slow. I let myself in with the spare key she'd given me years ago. I set the slow cooker on the counter. I filled her kettle and put it on because I intended to wait. And then, because the house was quiet and I am a mother and mothers notice things, I noticed that something felt off. I couldn't have told you what exactly. The kitchen was clean. Abby's drawings were still stuck to the fridge with the same little vegetable magnets. The dog's water bowl was full, but there was something, a stillness that was different from empty, more like held breath. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and listened. Nothing. I called out. No answer. I went back to the kitchen, and that's when I saw it, on the edge of the counter near the window, half tucked under a folded dish towel. A letter, opened, return address from a law office in Mississauga. I want to be honest with you, I knew I shouldn't read it. I knew that, but I also want to be honest that I read it anyway because I am a mother and the held breath feeling in that house had moved into my chest, and sometimes knowing is the only thing that quiets that feeling. It was 2 pages, legal language, formal, but the plain meaning of it came through clearly enough. It was a letter notifying my daughter that a creditor had obtained a judgment against her. The amount was $112,000. The creditor was a private lending company based in Mississauga. The letter said that if the judgment was not addressed, they would begin proceedings to place a lien against her property. $112,000. I put the letter back, exactly where I found it. I sat down at her kitchen table. The kettle boiled and clicked off. I didn't move to make tea. I sat there for a long time. I didn't say anything to her that day, or the next, or the week after that. I've thought about this since, and I know some people would say that was wrong, that I should have asked her immediately, that silence only lets things get worse. And maybe they're right. But here is what stopped me. I didn't know how to ask. Not because I was afraid of the answer, because I was afraid of what my asking would mean to her. My daughter is proud. She is capable and proud, and she has spent the better part of her adult life making sure I never worried about her. If I walked in and said, "I found the letter, I read it, I know," I would be taking something from her, the chance to tell me herself. So I waited, and I watched, and I noticed things I hadn't let myself notice before. The deck furniture she'd mentioned wanting to replace last fall, still the same. The small chip in her windshield she'd said she was getting fixed, still there. Abby's spring dance recital, which she'd been talking about since January. She went quiet when I asked if she'd paid for the costumes yet, said she was handling it, changed the subject. I started to piece things together the way you do when you are not quite ready to see the whole picture, but the pieces keep finding you anyway. 3 weeks after I found the letter, Martin called me. Not my daughter. Martin. "Can I come by tomorrow?" he said. "Just me. In the morning, if that's all right." "Is everything okay?" A pause. "I need to talk to you about something. I'd rather do it in person." He arrived at 9. I had coffee ready. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Gerald and I had eaten 30 years of breakfasts, and he put his hands flat on the wood and looked at them for a moment before he looked at me. "How much do you know?" he said. "Tell me what you came to tell me," I said. "Let's start there." He nodded, and then he told me. The debt was real. $112,000, and that was only the judgment that had reached the legal stage. There was more behind it. My daughter had borrowed money, first from a line of credit she'd opened without telling Martin, then from a second source he was still trying to trace, and the borrowing had started 4 years ago, around the time Gerald got sick. "She was paying for things," Martin said. "For you, for Gerald, things she didn't want you to know about." I heard those words and I felt the floor go somewhere underneath me. "What things?" I said, and my voice came out flat, not a question, more like the shell of one. He told me. The private nursing visit she'd arranged when I was insisting I could manage on my own and clearly couldn't. The medication that insurance hadn't covered, 3 different months. The travel costs when Gerald's specialist was in Toronto and I kept saying I'd take the bus and she kept somehow appearing with her car. The things I had accepted as her just being generous, just being her, just being my daughter who calls on Tuesdays for no reason. She had borrowed money to take care of her father while he was dying, and then she had kept borrowing, and the interest had compounded, and she hadn't told Martin until it was too late to manage quietly, and she hadn't told me because she never intended for me to know at all. Martin's voice was steady as he said all this. He's that kind of man, but his hands on the table were pressed flat and hard, and I could see what it cost him to be steady. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. "Because she's not sleeping," he said. "Because she cries in the car where she thinks I can't hear her. Because the lien is going to happen unless something changes, and she won't ask you for help, and she won't let me help enough, and I don't know what to do except come here and tell you the truth." I looked at this man who married my daughter, and who coaches hockey on Saturday mornings, and who pressed his hands flat on my kitchen table to keep himself from falling apart. "Okay," I said. "Okay, show me everything." He had a folder. He brought it in a plain canvas bag from the passenger seat of his truck. Inside were bank statements, the letter from the law office, a payment history from the line of credit, and a second letter from another creditor I hadn't known about. A smaller amount, but still real. We sat at my table for 2 hours. I asked questions. He answered them. By the end, I had a clear picture, and a clear picture is always better than a blurred one, even when what it shows you is hard. The total, with interest and the legal fees now attached, was closer to $140,000. I am not a wealthy woman. Gerald worked his whole life in insurance. We were careful. We saved what we could. And after he died, the financial advisor helped me understand what I had. I have the house, which is paid off. I have a modest RIF. I have a small pension from the years I worked in hospital administration before the children were born. I am comfortable. I am not rich. But I am a mother. She's not going to want this, I said. No, Martin agreed. She's going to say she won't take it. She is. I thought about my daughter crying in her car where she thought no one could hear her. I thought about her standing in a pharmacy 4 years ago, handing over her credit card for medication that wasn't covered, telling me not to worry about it, smiling the whole time. Let me deal with it, I said. Martin and I agreed on a few things before he left. He would tell her he'd spoken to me. No more secrets, that was the first condition. But he would tell her carefully, and he would tell her at home, and he would give me a few days before I came by. We needed her to have time to feel whatever she needed to feel before she had to face me, because I know my daughter, and her first feeling was going to be shame, and shame needs a little room to breathe before it's ready to have a conversation. He called me Thursday evening. He said he'd told her. He said she had cried for a long time, and then she had gone very quiet, and then she had asked if I was angry. He'd told her I wasn't. He said she didn't believe him. I called her myself that night. She answered on the second ring, and before I could say a word she said, "Mum, I'm so sorry," in a voice I hadn't heard from her since she was a child. The voice of a person who is not sorry for what they did, but is sorry that the whole thing became visible. Sorry that the person they most wanted to protect is now aware of the weight they've been carrying. "You don't have to be sorry," I said. "Mum. Listen to me. Are you listening?" A breath. "Yes." "Your father would have done the same thing. If the situation had been reversed, he would have moved heaven and earth and never said a word about it, and you know that. You are exactly like him. That is not a criticism." She didn't speak for a while. "I made it so much worse," she said finally. "I should have told Martin sooner. I should have told you. I couldn't stand the idea of you knowing and feeling guilty. You'd already been through so much." "I know," I said. "I know that's why. It got out of hand so fast. I kept thinking I could fix it before anyone found out." "I know that too." We talked for an hour, not about numbers, not about solutions, just about her father, about how much she missed him, about the November morning the previous year when Abby had said something at breakfast that was so purely Gerald, the same turn of phrase, the same little shrug, that my daughter had gone to the bathroom and sat on the floor and cried, about how grief is not the clean, finite thing people sometimes imply it is, about how it finds you in pharmacies and in the school parking lot and in your car with the music off. By the end, she was quiet in the way people get quiet when they've been carrying something a long time and have finally put it down. "Let me help," I said. "Just let me help." She said she needed to sleep on it. I told her that was fine. "Take all the time you need," I said, which was a small lie. The legal timeline didn't have a lot of patience, but that was tomorrow's problem. "I will spare you the detailed mechanics of what came next, because they are dull and impersonal in the way that financial things tend to be. I spoke to my own financial advisor. I spoke to a lawyer friend of Gerald's, a man named Douglas, who had known us for 30 years and who charged me for exactly none of the advice he gave. We worked out a way to address the judgment using a portion of my R5. There are rules about this, and taxes, and it was not as simple as writing a check, but it was manageable. My daughter fought me on it. Exactly as Martin had predicted, she fought me. She said it wasn't fair. It was my retirement. I needed that money. I told her that I was 64 years old and lived alone in a paid-off house and was in good health, and the most expensive thing I did in a given month was drive to Costco, and that I would be fine. We argued about it for 3 days. Good arguments, both of us, because we are both stubborn and neither of us is wrong about everything. But eventually she ran out of arguments, and I ran out of patience, and we came to an agreement. I would help with the judgment, the legal fees, and the larger of the 2 debts. The smaller one she and Martin would handle on a structured payment plan. She would not argue with me further about it. And she would come to dinner every Sunday for the next year, because what's the point of having a daughter nearby if I never see her? She laughed at that last part. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh in weeks, and I had to hold the phone away from my face for a second. There is one more part of this that I have to tell you, and it is the part I have thought about most in the months since. The week after everything was settled, the judgment addressed, the paperwork filed, Martin's handshake agreement with the second creditor finalized, my daughter came over on a Sunday. She brought Abby. We made pancakes, which Abby is very serious about, and the three of us sat at my kitchen table in the morning light and ate together. And Abby told us at length about a book she was reading at school, about a girl who finds a baby bird. I watched my daughter across the table. She looked like herself again. Not completely. There are things that leave a mark. But she was holding her coffee cup the way she used to, and she was laughing at something Abby said, and the held breath feeling that had been sitting in my chest since March was gone. After Abby had gone to find the dog and we were clearing the table, my daughter stopped moving. She just stood there holding 2 plates and looked at me. "I think about the fact that you read that letter," she said, "and I used to feel embarrassed about it. But now I think, if you hadn't seen it, if Martin hadn't told you, I don't know how much longer I could have kept going." "You would have told me eventually," I said. She shook her head. "I don't know if I would have. I really don't." I took the plates from her and I set them in the sink. "Then I'm glad I made tea that day," I said. She looked at me for a moment, and then she shook her head again, and this time she was smiling. "I have been thinking a lot lately about the kind of help that people accept and the kind they refuse. And I think the difference, a lot of the time, is not the help itself. It's whether the person offering it makes you feel ashamed. My daughter spent 4 years trying to protect me from knowing she was struggling. She did that because she loves me, and because she is proud, but also because somewhere underneath it, she was afraid that needing help would make her look like she had failed. She hadn't failed. She had been a daughter who loved her father and couldn't bear to watch her parents struggle. She had made a decision that got complicated and then spent years trying to uncomplicate it alone. That is not failure. That is a person trying to hold too much by herself. I think about all the people, women especially, but not only women, who are right now somewhere in the middle of something they've decided they have to manage alone, telling themselves it's not that bad yet, telling themselves they'll sort it out before anyone has to know, driving home and crying where they think no one can hear them. The thing about secrets is they don't stay still. They grow, and they compound interest just like debts do, and the longer you carry them, the heavier they get. You don't have to carry it alone. That's what I'd tell my daughter if I could go back to the beginning of it. You never had to carry it alone. I am your mother. That is the whole point of me. Abby still talks about that Sunday with the pancakes. She has decided she wants to make them every week now, and she is very particular about the blueberries, and she assigns us jobs. I pour the batter. Her mother flips. Abby watches the edges and tells us when they're ready. She has Gerald's eyes and his patience and his certainty that the people around him will show up. I hope she keeps that last one. I hope life is gentle enough with her that she never has to learn otherwise. And if it isn't, when it isn't, I will be here. That's the whole point of me. I keep coming back to the image of my daughter in a pharmacy, credit card in hand, smiling at me across the counter and saying, "Don't worry about it." That smile, I accepted it so many times. I told myself it was just who she was, generous, capable, never one to make a fuss. It did not occur to me to look harder because I didn't want to see anything that would worry me. I think that was my part in it. I was grieving Gerald, and I let myself be looked after without asking what it cost her. There's a version of this story where things go differently, where the judgment becomes a lien, where the lien forces a sale, where my daughter and Martin and Abby have to start over somewhere smaller, and the weight of 4 years of silence becomes something that cracks a marriage instead of just straining it. That version was close. Closer than any of us said out loud at the time. What stopped it was Martin walking through my door with a canvas bag and his hands pressed flat on my kitchen table. That took something. It would have been easier for him to keep trying to manage it quietly, or to resent my daughter for the position she put them in, or to decide it wasn't his place to involve her mother. He did none of those things. He thought clearly about what was actually needed, set his own feelings to one side, and did the harder right thing. That kind of clear-headedness under pressure, knowing what matters most and acting on it even when it's uncomfortable, is not common. I have more respect for him than I probably say. And my daughter, I've thought a great deal about what it means that she kept this to herself for 4 years. On one level, it was a mistake, and she knows that, and she has said so. Debt compounds. Silence compounds alongside it. The practical lesson is real. Ask for help sooner. Tell the people who love you what is actually happening. But underneath the mistake was something I don't want to flatten into a lesson. She saw her father declining, and she saw me holding on, and she decided, quietly, alone, without asking for credit, that she would do whatever it took. She rearranged her entire financial life so that we wouldn't have to. That is a kind of moral seriousness that I find almost hard to look at directly. The choice she made came from a genuine place in her character, a place that cares more about the people around her than about her own comfort or security. That doesn't excuse the 4 years of secrecy. But it explains them, and it tells me something about who she is that I already knew but now know more deeply. The thing about carrying something alone for too long is that it doesn't make you stronger. It makes you quieter. It makes you cry in your car with the music off. Resilience, real resilience, the kind that actually holds, is not the ability to bear weight indefinitely without help. It is the ability to know when you've reached your limit and to trust the people who love you enough to say so. My daughter is learning that. So, if I'm honest, am I? Abby assigned us jobs with the pancakes again last Sunday. I pour. Her mother flips. Abby watches the edges. She is very serious about the edges. I don't need more than that.